The Imperial Palace had stood for 10,000 years as humanity's greatest monument, a mountain of gold and marble built upon the bones of Terra's forgotten past. Within its innermost sanctum, the golden throne hummed with the psychic screams of 1,000 dying souls, their life force fed daily into the corpse god who held back the tides of chaos. Custodians in auramite armor stood eternal vigil, their guardian spears never wavering, their eyes never closing. The master of mankind sat entombed, his skeletal form barely visible through the machinery that kept him alive and humanity's astronomican burning across the galaxy. Then reality hiccuped. The custodian's weapons moved for the first time in centuries, tracking toward a disturbance that should not exist. Space folded impossibly inward, and a man appeared where no man could appear, inside the throne room itself, past every defense, every psychic ward, every layer of protection that the Imperium had built across millennia. He wore a Starfleet uniform from a universe that had never existed in this timeline, his face bearing an expression of theatrical curiosity mixed with absolute certainty of his own superiority. "Well, well," Q said, surveying the chamber with distaste. "I've seen primitive cultures before, but this is impressively depressing, even by those standards. Tell me, do you actually enjoy the whole rotting corpse god aesthetic, or is it more of a practical choice?" Captain General Trajan Valoris moved with transhuman speed, his guardian spear aimed at the intruder's heart. "You stand in the presence of the master of mankind. Identify yourself before—" Q snapped his fingers. Time stopped. Not slowed, not paused. Stopped. The custodians froze mid-lunge, their weapons hanging in air. The tech priests attending the golden throne became statues of red robes and mechanical limbs. The psychers in their choir cradles, mouths open in silent screams, hung suspended in their agony. Across Terra, across the Sol system, across the Segmentum Solar and beyond, across the entire galaxy, every living thing simply stopped. Orcs mid-war, Tyranids mid-feeding, Eldar mid-prophecy. The great game of chaos itself ground to incomprehensible halt as Q imposed his will upon a universe that had never known his like. Only two beings remained aware. Q turned to face the golden throne, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor of mankind's psychic consciousness fully manifested outside his prison. A golden figure, translucent and flickering, stood before the entity from beyond the stars. The Emperor's face was gaunt, ancient beyond mortal comprehension, bearing the weight of humanity's survival in every line. "You should not exist." The Emperor's voice was thunder and whisper, the death scream of stars and the first cry of newborn infants. "What are you?" "I am Q," the entity said, performing an elaborate bow that somehow managed to be mocking despite its technical perfection. "Member of the Q Continuum, a species that evolved past your petty concerns about chaos and the warp, several billion years before your precious humanity learned to bang rocks together. I've been observing your little empire for some time now, and, frankly, I'm appalled. You exist outside the warp, outside reality as this galaxy knows it." The Emperor's projection moved closer, studying Q with the intensity of a being who had seen the birth of human civilization. "Why have you come?" "Because," Q said, his theatrical demeanor dropping for a moment to reveal something harder beneath. "I put humanity on trial once before, in another universe, another timeline. I tested them to see if they deserved to survive their own adolescence. They passed, barely, by showing they could grow, change, evolve beyond their base instincts." He gestured at the throne room, at the skeletal corpse held alive by suffering. "But you've turned humanity into this. 10,000 years of stagnation, tyranny, genocide on scales that would make even the Borg pause. You claim to protect humanity, But I wonder if you've simply created a different kind of damnation. The Emperor's projection flickered, and for a moment, the mask of the Golden God cracked. You do not understand the threats we face, the enemies at the gates. Don't I? Q's eyes flashed with power that dwarfed even the Emperor's psychic might. I've seen your chaos gods, those petty warp entities gorging themselves on emotion. I've watched your tyrannids strip worlds bare. I've observed the Necrons awakening from their tomb sleep, and yes, I've witnessed your Imperium's response. Burn the alien, kill the mutant, purge the heretic. Faith and fire and genocide, all in your name. He stepped closer to the projection. So here's what's going to happen. I'm putting you on trial. You, personally, will defend 10,000 years of tyranny. You'll justify every atrocity committed in your name, and if you fail, if humanity is found wanting, I'll erase your species from the timeline. No Imperium, no humanity, just a galaxy where your potential was never realized. You cannot judge. Reality twisted again, and the throne room transformed. Q and the Emperor now stood in an impossible space, a courtroom that existed nowhere and everywhere, built from concepts rather than matter. The architecture was Federation-style formal, all clean lines and rational design, a deliberate insult to the Imperium's Gothic grandeur. Seats materialized in rows, galleries forming for witnesses that didn't yet exist. At the center stood two podiums, one for prosecution, one for defense. Behind them, a judge's bench where Q now sat, robed suddenly in judicial vestments that somehow maintained his sardonic dignity. Court is now in session, Q announced, his voice echoing through the impossible space. The charge is simple: crimes against sentience. The defendant, humanity itself, represented by its so-called God Emperor. The question before this court: do you deserve to exist, or should I show mercy to the galaxy and wipe you from history? The Emperor's projection stood alone at the defense podium, golden light dimming. If you truly observed this galaxy, you would understand. There are no innocent choices here, only survival or extinction. Then convince me, Q said, leaning forward with predatory interest. Show me that your Imperium is anything more than 10,000 years of justified evil. Prove that humanity's survival is worth the ocean of blood you've spilled. He snapped his fingers again. But first, let's populate this courtroom with some witnesses. After all, what's a trial without testimony? Figures began materializing in the gallery seats. Some wore power armor bearing heraldry 10,000 years old. Others were twisted, corrupted things that had once been human. Xenos representatives appeared, their alien eyes filled with ancient hatred. And more kept coming: inquisitors and Imperial Guard veterans, tech priests and penitent psychers, each one a voice ready to speak, for or against the master of mankind. The Emperor's projection looked at the assembling witnesses and saw the weight of his choices given form. Q smiled. Let's begin with the charges, shall we? The courtroom filled with witnesses drawn from across time itself, each one plucked from the moment of their greatest relevance and held in Q's temporal stasis. They appeared confused, disoriented, weapons drawn, or minds reaching for psychic powers that wouldn't function here. Q had constructed his trial ground with rules that superseded even the warp's influence. No violence, no psychic assault, only words and evidence. For beings who lived in a galaxy where war was the only truth, the prohibition was more disturbing than any torture. At the prosecution bench, Q materialized a lectern bearing the seal of the Q continuum, a symbol that hurt to look at, geometry that suggested dimensions the human mind couldn't process. The prosecution will now present its opening statement, he announced, then paused with theatrical timing. which would be me, naturally. I'll be serving as both judge and prosecutor because, frankly, no one else in this galaxy is qualified. Biased tribunal. The Emperor's projection spoke, his voice weaker now. Each moment away from the Golden Throne's life support taxed him, burning through the psychic choir's souls faster than they could be replaced. You condemn without hearing defense. Oh, you'll get your chance to speak, Q assured him. But first, let's establish the facts. Bailiff? He gestured and a court recorder appeared, a servitor, but one freed from its lobotomized existence, its human consciousness restored for these proceedings. The servitor looked at its own hands in horror and wonder. Please read the charges. The servitor's voice cracked as it spoke, decades of silence breaking. The God Emperor of mankind stands accused of crimes against sentience, including but not limited to genocide of Xenos species numbering in the thousands, purging of human populations deemed unworthy, totaling trillions across 10 millennia, enforced technological stagnation, religious persecution, xenophobia as state policy, creation of weapons of mass destruction in the form of the Astartes, lies to his own sons regarding the nature of chaos, directly causing the Horus heresy through said deception, transformation of humanity into a fascist theocracy, worshipping him as a god despite his own teachings. And finally, the servitor's voice dropped to a whisper, condemning himself to 10,000 years of living death rather than allowing humanity to evolve past his vision. The Emperor's projection flickered with barely contained fury. Every action was necessary. This galaxy devours the weak. Humanity's survival required tyranny, Q interrupted, required faith-based genocide, required turning your species into a civilization that measures its military successes by how many billions died in victory. He stood from his judge's bench and walked to the center of the court. Let me show everyone here exactly what the Imperium has become. Witness Alpha, the purging of Goshen Nafor. Reality rippled, and the courtroom's walls became windows into the past. A hive world appeared in crystalline clarity. Goshen I-4, its population of 15 billion, engaged in their daily struggles under the Imperium's oppressive weight. Then the Inquisition arrived, declaring the planet's governor a heretic for reducing work hours in the Prometheum refineries. The scene played out with brutal efficiency: orbital bombardment, virus bombs, cyclonic torpedoes, 15 billion souls screaming as their world burned, the Inquisitor's final report stamped with the phrase, "Purged in the Emperor's name, innocence proves nothing." Several witnesses in the gallery looked away. Others, the Chaos Champions, the twisted things that had once served the Imperium, watched with grim satisfaction. 15 billion, Q said softly. Not heretics, not chaos cultists, just humans who happened to live under a governor who showed mercy. Tell me, Emperor, was their death necessary? The governor's leniency would have spread, production would have fallen, other worlds would have demanded the same. The Imperium's war machine requires absolute discipline. So 15 billion died to maintain production quotas. Q let the words hang in the air. Witness Beta, the extinction of the Diasporex, a human civilization that chose to ally with Xenos rather than join your great crusade. Your response? The courtroom showed new images, fleets burning, mixed species colonies reduced to ash, human children executed alongside their alien friends because they'd been declared tainted by Xenos contact. The Iron Hands Space Marines conducting the purge with mechanical efficiency, their bolters ending families that had lived in peace for generations. They were human, Q continued. They'd survived the age of strife through cooperation with aliens. They'd built something that worked. But because they didn't submit to your vision of humanity's destiny, You labeled them traitors and killed them all. Humanity cannot survive in partnership with Xenos. The Emperor's voice carried absolute conviction. Every alien species in this galaxy would enslave or exterminate us, given the chance. The Eldar nearly birthed a chaos god through their depravity. The orcs exist only for war. The Tyranids devour all life. Unity under human rule was the only path. Was it? Q snapped his fingers again, and a new witness materialized at the prosecution bench. An Eldar Farseer, her wraithbone armor inscribed with runes of mourning. She looked at the Emperor with eyes that held millennia of sorrow and hatred. Farseer Lathriel of Craft World Ulthway, Q introduced. Your people have fought both with and against the Imperium. Tell this court what you've witnessed. The Farseer's voice was crystalline, musical even in its anger. The Mon-Ki Emperor speaks of our fall as though it justifies his genocide of our race. Yes, we birthed she who thirsts through our ancestors' excess, a shame we will carry until our species' final breath. But we survived. We adapted. We created the paths to control our emotions, built the infinity circuits to preserve our souls. She turned to face the Emperor's projection directly. And how did the Imperium respond to our survival? By attacking our maiden worlds, burning our craft worlds, slaughtering our people wherever we sought refuge. We offered alliance during the Great Crusade. Our Farseers saw the Horus heresy coming and tried to warn you. You rejected us, declared us Xenos filth, and turned our warnings into accusations of manipulation. Your warnings were self-serving. Your species seeks only its own survival. As do you. Lathriel's composure cracked, grief and fury bleeding through. The difference is we don't pretend our survival justifies any atrocity. We don't build an empire on lies and call it enlightenment. You made your sons into weapons, then acted surprised when they turned on you. You denied the existence of chaos, then watched half your legions fall to it. Every failure of your Imperium stems from your arrogance, the certainty that only you knew the right path for humanity. Q let her words echo through the courtroom. Strong opening, he said. Now let's hear from someone who served the Imperium faithfully and was rewarded with damnation. Witness Gamma, Honso, Warsmith of the Iron Warriors. A Chaos Space Marine materialized, his armor a patchwork of loyalist and traitor colors, his augmetic eye glowing with baleful intelligence. This was one of the newborn, created after the heresy from stolen gene seed, never knowing service to the pre-fall Imperium, raised in bitterness and siege warfare. Honso, Q said, you've fought both against and alongside the Imperium's forces. What's your testimony? The Warsmith's voice was grinding metal, corrupted by millennia in the eye of terror. The Emperor created us as weapons, then expected us to be grateful for the honor. No culture, no purpose beyond conquest. My gene father Perturabo built wonders during the Great Crusade, fortresses, siege works, architectural marvels. But the Emperor only valued him for his ability to grind down enemy defenses. Never glory, never recognition. Just endless, thankless war. Perturabo chose bitterness, chose betrayal. Did he? Honso laughed, the sound harsh and broken. Or did you create conditions that made betrayal inevitable? You made weapons and expected sons. You gave them power and expected loyalty. You preached enlightenment while conducting wars of extermination. The Imperium you built is a monument to hypocrisy, a tyranny that calls itself necessary, a genocide that calls itself salvation. Q returned to his judge's bench, surveying the courtroom with satisfaction. 3 witnesses, 3 different perspectives, one consistent theme. The Imperium's brutality isn't an unfortunate side effect of survival, it's the entire point. You've built a civilization where cruelty is virtue, where mercy is weakness, where faith has replaced reason and purging has replaced justice. He looked at the Emperor's dimming projection. You have 10,000 years of atrocities to defend, so start defending. Tell everyone here, why humanity deserves to continue existing when your protection has turned them into the very monsters you claim to fight against. The Emperor's projection steadied, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of ancient burden. You want to understand the choices I made? Then let me show you the galaxy as it truly is. Let me show you what awaits humanity if the Imperium falls. Q smiled. Now we're getting somewhere. Show me, then. Justify your empire of corpses. The Emperor's projection expanded, golden light filling the courtroom as he reached across Q's temporal barrier to grasp memories from his own consciousness. The walls dissolved into visions drawn from the master of mankind's perspective. Not propaganda, not imperial records, but raw truth as experienced by a being who had walked Terra since before humanity learned to write. You speak of my brutality as though I chose it from malice. The Emperor's voice resonated through the visions. Let me show you the alternatives I considered, the paths I could not take. The courtroom became ancient Terra during the Age of Strife, a world torn apart by warp storms and psychic awakening. Humans with nascent abilities tore reality apart accidentally, demons pouring through the gaps, cities burned, nations fell. Technology failed as the warp storms intensified. The Emperor stood among the ruins, a figure of gold watching humanity regress to barbarism. I could have hidden, the Emperor narrated, withdrawn to safety while humanity destroyed itself. For thousands of years I had guided from the shadows, believing humanity should forge its own path. But the warp's awakening changed everything. Without intervention, Terra would have become another Daemon world. The scene shifted to the Unification Wars, the Emperor's Thunder Warriors, brutally efficient killers, purging warlords and techno-barbarians from Terra's surface. Q watched with interest as the Thunder Warriors were methodically eliminated after their purpose was served, their genetic instability making them too dangerous to keep alive. Ah, yes, Q interjected. Your first attempt at super soldiers, created, used, then discarded when inconvenient, a template you'd repeat with the Space Marines. The Thunder Warriors were dying already. Their augmentations were unsustainable. I gave them purpose before the end. You gave them death, Q corrected. But continue. This is fascinating. The vision moved forward to the creation of the Primarchs, 20 godlings crafted through genetic mastery and warp science, each designed to embody specific aspects of humanity's potential. The Emperor poured decades of work into his sons, but the scene showed something Imperial records never mentioned: his cold calculation. Each Primarch was a tool first, a son second. Magnus designed to control Psychers. Angron meant to inspire courage through controlled aggression. Mortarion to endure any hardship. Then the scene Q had been waiting for, the Chaos God scattering the infant Primarchs across the galaxy, the Emperor's desperate search, his decision to continue the Great Crusade regardless. Farseer Lathriel spoke from the gallery. You knew chaos had touched them. You found them raised on worlds shaped by the ruinous powers, Angron with torture implants, Mortarion poisoned by toxins, Lorgar seeking gods to worship. You retrieved them and placed them in command of your legions without addressing their trauma, without healing their wounds. There was no time for healing. The Emperor's voice carried frustration. Humanity was scattered across a galaxy hostile to its existence. every year of delay meant more human worlds falling to Xenos or chaos. The Great Crusade could not wait for perfect suns. "So you weaponized damaged goods," Q observed, "and when they broke, as traumatized weapons inevitably do, you blamed them for failing rather than acknowledging you'd set them up to fail." A new witness materialized in the gallery, not a Chaos champion or inquisitor, but a remembrancer from the Great Crusade era, an artist who had traveled with the Luna Wolves before they became the Sons of Horus. Her name was Nyla Carthens, and her hands still bore ink stains from illustrations she'd completed 30 seconds before. Q plucked her from the past. "Miss Carthens," Q addressed her, "you witnessed the Great Crusade firsthand. Tell us what you saw." Nyla looked around the impossible courtroom with an artist's eye for detail. "I saw wonder and horror in equal measure. The Astartes were magnificent, perfect warriors reclaiming the galaxy for humanity. But I also saw what they did to worlds that resisted. I watched cities burn because their leaders wouldn't swear immediate fealty. I saw entire populations executed for practicing religions that predated the Imperium's arrival." Her voice dropped. "And I saw how the Emperor treated his sons, like generals, like assets, never like the children they desperately wanted to be. Sentiment could not be afforded. The Emperor's projection grew harsher. Each Primarch commanded legions tens of thousands strong. They were leaders of humanity's greatest military expansion. Treating them as children would have undermined their authority. Or, Q suggested, treating them as children might have prevented half of them from turning traitor. But let's examine your other decisions. The Council of Nicaea, your edict banning psychic powers among the legions. Walk us through that brilliant strategy." The courtroom showed the council, Magnus the Red pleading his case for controlled psychic study, the Emperor rendering judgment that banned all legionary psychic practice except for navigators and astropaths. The scene then jumped forward to Magnus's desperate attempt to warn the Emperor about Horus's betrayal, his psychic projection shattering the Webway project and creating the wound that would eventually require the Golden Throne. "You banned the study of psychic powers," Q narrated, but never explained why. "You never told your sons about chaos, about the warp's true nature, because you believed ignorance would protect them. So when Magnus tried to save you, he accidentally damned himself and broke your greatest project, all because you didn't trust your own sons with the truth. If I had revealed chaos, it would have given the dark gods power over my legends." The Emperor's voice carried the weight of ancient regret. Knowledge of chaos is itself corrupting. Speaking the names of the dark gods gives them strength. I chose to shield humanity through ignorance. Hanso laughed from the gallery. "And how well did that work? Half the legions fell to chaos anyway, but they fell blind. Easy prey for the ruinous powers promises because they didn't understand what they were facing. If you'd taught us, we might have been prepared. Instead, you created perfect victims." A new witness appeared, Argel Tal, the Crimson Lord of the Word-Bearers, one of the first space marines to willingly embrace chaos corruption. His armor was fused with demonic essence, his eyes burning with warp fire, but his voice carried terrible lucidity. "Father," Argel Tal addressed the Emperor's projection, "I was there on Cadia when the Word-Bearers discovered the primordial truth. I was there when we learned that the gods we'd been forbidden to worship actually existed. Not metaphors, not superstition, but real powers in the warp. And do you know what I felt? Corruption, madness. Relief," Argel Tal corrected. "Relief that the universe made sense again. You'd spent decades telling us the imperial truth, that there were no gods, that reason and science would save humanity. But we'd all seen things that contradicted it. Warp entities, psychic phenomena, powers that defied rational explanation. You told us these were just anomalies, natural forces we didn't yet understand. His voice grew bitter. Then we discovered you'd lied. The gods were real and you'd known all along. You just decided we couldn't be trusted with the truth. Q leaned forward. Let's examine that lie more closely. You preached the imperial truth, atheism, rationality, rejection of superstition. But you yourself were using warp sorcery to create the Primarchs, binding demons, conducting rituals beneath Terra. You forbade religion while setting yourself up as humanity's immortal ruler. Did you not see the contradiction? I sought to starve the Chaos Gods by denying them worship. The Emperor's projection flickered. Humanity's faith feeds the warp. By eliminating religion, I hoped to weaken chaos and eventually isolate humanity from the Immaterium entirely through the Webway project. A project you never completed, Q noted. A project that failed because you didn't trust your sons. Tell me, Emperor, at what point did you realize your grand plan was doomed? When Magnus broke your Webway? When Horus turned? Or earlier, when you decided that lying to beings capable of conquering galaxies was somehow a sustainable strategy? The courtroom fell silent except for the Emperor's projection's labored breathing, a psychic manifestation of the strain he felt across Q's temporal barrier. A new voice spoke from the gallery, unexpected and filled with cold authority. An Inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus stepped forward, Inquisitor Goldus Voke, his power armor inscribed with wards against demonic corruption, his face bearing the scars of a century fighting chaos. He looked at Q with barely restrained fury. You judge the Emperor's choices from the perspective of someone who's never faced extinction, Voke said. You question his methods as though alternatives existed. But I've fought chaos for over 100 years, Q. I've seen what happens to worlds that try to negotiate with demons, that attempt to understand the warp rather than reject it. They all fall. Every single one. Q regarded the Inquisitor with interest. Ah, the defense begins to mount a case. Go on. The Emperor made hard choices, brutal choices, because soft choices lead to damnation. You show us Goshen 4, a world purged for leniency. But I've purged 37 worlds in my career, and every single purge prevented greater catastrophe. One world's heresy can spread to entire sectors. One moment of mercy can doom billions. Voke's voice was steel. The Emperor built an imperium that survives through absolute discipline because anything less invites chaos in. At what cost? Nyla Carthens interjected. I survived the Horus heresy, Inquisitor. I watched the Imperium transform from the Emperor's dream of enlightened human dominion into a fascist nightmare that would have horrified him. The Lectitio Divinitatus, the very religion the Emperor forbade, became state doctrine. The Imperium he built to protect humanity became a prison where questioning is heresy and hope is treason. Q nodded. The witness makes an excellent point. Emperor, you fought to eliminate religion, but 10,000 years later, humanity worships you as a god. Your Imperium enforces faith in you through the ecclesiarchy, burns non-believers, and conducts crusades in your name. The imperial cult is everything you despised. How do you defend that? The Emperor's projection dimmed further, and for the first time since the trial began, something like pain crossed his ancient features. When he spoke, his voice carried the exhaustion of 10 millennia, bearing witness to everything he'd built, becoming corrupted beyond recognition. I do not defend it. The admission sent shockwaves through the courtroom. The Lectitio Divinitatus, the imperial cult, the worship that sustains me now, all of it stands against everything I fought to create. But here is the terrible truth Kes failed to acknowledge. I am not the Imperium. I have not ruled for 10,000 years. I have only endured, bound to this throne, keeping the Astronomicon lit and the warp breach closed, while humanity made its own choices in my absence. Q's theatrical expression shifted to genuine curiosity. Are you actually claiming no responsibility for what the Imperium became? You built the Foundation, Emperor. You created the Administratum, the Mechanicus Alliance, the Inquisition. You established the precedents of purging Xenos and eliminating dissent. Don't pretend the Imperium's current state is unrelated to your original design. I built a military structure to reunify and defend humanity. The Emperor's projection strengthened, drawing on psychic reserves that were killing servitors back in the real throne room. What it became after my entombment, the religious fanaticism, the stagnation, the worship, those were born from humanity's fear and desperation, not my design. I am a corpse kept alive by necessity, not a ruler making daily choices. A new witness materialized in the gallery, Robot Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, pulled from the moment after his resurrection in M42. The Lord of Ultramar looked around the impossible courtroom with tactical assessment before focusing on his father's projection with an expression mixing reverence and profound disappointment. "Father," Guilliman said, his voice the measured tone of a general delivering a difficult report. "I returned to the Imperium 10,000 years after I fell in combat. I saw what our dream became. The Emperor speaks truth. He did not rule during these millennia. But he is also wrong to claim the Imperium's current state is divorced from his original vision." The Emperor's projection turned toward his son. "Explain. You built an Imperium based on absolute authority and necessary brutality. You taught us that human survival required unwavering discipline and the elimination of all threats, internal and external. You created institutions, the Inquisition, the Adeptus Arbites, the Ecclesiarchy's predecessors, designed to maintain order through fear and force." Guilliman's analytical mind cut through emotion. "When you fell at Horus's hand and were entombed, the Imperium simply continued along the trajectory you'd established. The bureaucracy expanded because you'd created a galaxy-spanning administrative structure. The military doctrine remained brutal because you'd trained us to conquer without mercy. The faith emerged because humanity needed hope, and you'd eliminated every other source of meaning except service to the Imperium." "The Primarch makes my case for me," Q observed. "The Imperium's current horror isn't a corruption of your vision, Emperor. It's the logical conclusion of it. You built a machine designed to grind up lives in the name of survival, and now you're upset that it's still grinding 10,000 years later." Inquisitor Voke stood again, his scarred face defiant. "And what alternative would you propose, Q? The Emperor created the Imperium as humanity's shield against a galaxy that wants us extinct. Perhaps it's brutal, authoritarian, stagnant, but it's survived. 10,000 years of endless war and humanity still exists. Name me another species in this galaxy that can make that claim while facing chaos, tyrannids, orcs and necrons simultaneously." "Survival isn't virtue," Q countered. "A virus survives. Cancer survives. The Imperium has survived by becoming the very thing it claimed to oppose. A civilization that devours its own people, that treats human life as ammunition, that has transformed survival from a goal into an ideology that justifies any atrocity." Farseer Lathriel spoke again from the gallery. "The Mon-Ki Inquisitor asks what alternative existed. My people offer one answer: discipline without brutality, survival without genocide. After our fall, we could have become monsters. We had every excuse. The birth of She Who Thirsts had damned us, left us vulnerable to chaos in ways humanity cannot comprehend. Yet we chose the path, the infinity circuits. rigid control over our emotions. We survive through discipline, yes, but not through the wholesale slaughter of other species. Your species numbers in the billions, Gilliman responded with military precision. Humanity numbers in the quadrillions across 1,000,000 worlds. The scale of our survival requires resources, territory, and industrial capacity that necessitates conflict. The Eldar can afford philosophical purity because you're a dying species holding on to scattered craft worlds. Humanity must fight because we're the dominant species trying to maintain that dominance. Exactly. Q stood from his judge's bench, his voice rising. You've just articulated the core problem. Humanity under the Emperor's Imperium doesn't seek survival. It seeks dominance. The Great Crusade wasn't a defensive action. It was aggressive conquest. You didn't reclaim human worlds and leave alien species alone. You exterminated them on principle. The Imperium doesn't fight only when attacked. It launches crusades into territories that pose no threat because the doctrine demands human supremacy. Because alien supremacy means human extinction. The Emperor's voice carried absolute conviction. The Eldar Empire, before its fall, kept humanity in feudal stagnation, treating us as primitives beneath notice. The Orcs would reduce our worlds to battlefields. The Necrons view all organic life as inferior. The Tyranids didn't arrive until after the Imperium was already established, Q interrupted. Don't cite threats that emerged after your choices were made. Let's focus on your Great Crusade era. You launched humanity across the galaxy with the explicit goal of exterminating or subjugating every non-human species you encountered. The Interrex, a human civilization living peacefully alongside aliens, you destroyed. The Diasporex, murdered for their Xenos alliances. Dozens of minor alien species that pose no threat to humanity, purged from existence because they occupied worlds you wanted. A new witness appeared, a human soldier from the Imperial Guard, a veteran of the Damocles Gulf campaign against the Tau Empire. Sergeant Hadrian Keel bore the scars of decades fighting for the Imperium, his lasgun still gripped with veteran's ease despite being in a courtroom where it couldn't function. Q, Hadrian said, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a man who'd seen too many battles. I fought the Tau. Do you know what they offered me when I was captured? Medical treatment, education, a place in their greater good. They treated me better as a prisoner than the commissariat treated me as a soldier. He looked at the Emperor's projection. The Tau are naive, yes. They don't understand how dark this galaxy really is. But they proved something the Imperium denies. That cooperation between species is possible. That survival doesn't require genocide. The Tau are young. The Emperor's response was weary. Give them 10,000 years. Watch as chaos notices them, as the Tyranids reach their space, as they learn the galaxy's true nature. Their idealism will not survive contact with reality. Perhaps, Q said, or perhaps they'll find a better path than humanity did. But that's speculation. Let's return to documented fact, specifically the Horus heresy. You've claimed your lies about chaos were meant to protect humanity, yet your deception directly caused the greatest catastrophe in human history. Half your legions turned traitor. Your Webway project failed. Billions died in the Civil War. And you ended up entombed for 10,000 years while the Imperium descended into the very superstition you'd fought to eliminate. Justify that. The Emperor's projection flickered, and for a long moment, silence filled the courtroom. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made even Q pause. I cannot. The admission was barely a whisper. The heresy was my failure. I created weapons and expected sons. I imposed order and expected loyalty. I kept secrets and expected trust. Horus's betrayal, Magnus's error, Angren's rage, Lorgar's faith-seeking. Each reflected my own failures as father and leader. I saw my Primarchs as tools to reunify humanity. I did not see them as individuals with needs beyond military purpose. Argel Tal leaned forward in the gallery. Is that an apology, Father? After 10,000 years, do you finally admit you were wrong? I admit I failed. The Emperor's projection looked at each corrupted Astartes in the gallery. Every choice I made was calculated to maximize humanity's survival. But calculations based on flawed assumptions produce flawed results. I assumed my sons would understand the necessity of my actions without explanation. I assumed humanity could be unified through force and inspiration, alone. I assumed the Chaos Gods could be defeated through denial and ignorance. And all your assumptions proved catastrophically wrong, Q summarized. Yet here you sit, 10,000 years later, still holding humanity in your death grip through the Golden Throne. Still the linchpin of an imperium that has become everything you claim to oppose. Why didn't you just die, Emperor? Why subject yourself and humanity to this eternal suffering? The Emperor's projection turned to face Q directly, and for the first time something like genuine emotion, grief, determination, ancient sorrow shone through the golden mask. Because if I die, humanity dies with me. His voice resonated with terrible truth. The Astronomicon that guides humanity's ships through the warp. I am its power source, the wound in the webway beneath Terra that would flood the planet with daemons. I am the seal holding it closed, the Chaos Gods who would corrupt every human psyche and turn the species into their playthings. I am the psychic lighthouse that offers resistance. I do not endure because I wish to rule. I endure because the alternative is extinction. Q studied the Emperor's projection with something approaching respect. So you're trapped, a prisoner of your own necessity. That's almost tragic. He returned to his bench. But it doesn't answer the fundamental question. Does humanity deserve to survive if survival requires this level of perpetual suffering? If the price of existence is an eternity of fascism, genocide, and religious fanaticism, is that price worth paying? The courtroom fell silent, waiting for an answer that would determine humanity's fate. The Emperor's projection expanded, filling the courtroom with golden light that pushed back against Q's constructed reality. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a being who had guided humanity since its birth, who had watched civilizations rise and fall, who had borne witness to horrors Q's omnipotence had never personally endured. You ask if the price is worth paying. The Emperor's words resonated through every witness, every observer. Let me show you what happens when the price is not paid. The courtroom walls dissolved into nightmare visions, not imperial propaganda, but genuine glimpses into alternate timelines where the Emperor had made different choices. Q watched with sharp interest as the first scenario unfolded. Timeline. Alpha. I refused to intervene during the Age of Strife. Terra appeared, burning. Psychers tore reality apart as their powers awakened without guidance or control. Demons poured through the gaps, claiming world after world. Humanity regressed to pre-industrial barbarism within a generation, scattered populations hunted by warp entities that fed on their terror. No Imperium, no Great Crusade, no hope, just endless darkness as humanity became cattle for the Chaos Gods. The vision shifted forward 10,000 years. Terra was a demon world, its surface a writhing mass of corrupted flesh. The few humans that remained were twisted, broken things worshipping the dark gods through acts of depravity that made even the chaos champions in the gallery look away. Without unification, without the Astronomicon, without the Imperium's structure, this is humanity's fate. Extinction or damnation, those were the only alternatives. Speculation, Q countered, though his voice carried less certainty. You can't know that would have happened. I lived through it. The Emperor's projection blazed brighter. I watched humanity's first rise and fall. I saw the age of technology end in horror as AI rebellion and warp storms tore civilization apart. I witnessed thousands of years of suffering before I chose to intervene. This is not speculation. This is observed fact. Guilliman spoke, his voice carrying tactical assessment. Q, you've existed outside this galaxy's context. You don't understand the warp's nature. It's not like the Q continuum, another plane of existence with its own rules. The warp is emotion given form, thought made manifest. Every human feeling feeds it. Every act of violence strengthens Korn. Every scheme empowers Tzeentch. Every despair nourishes Nurgle. Every excess feeds Slanesh. Humanity cannot exist without the warp, but the warp will corrupt any human who approaches it without protection. The Emperor's protection, Q said pointedly. Yes. Guilliman's admission was heavy with recognition of the trap. Father became the linchpin because no other force in the galaxy could serve that function. The alternative to the Emperor's tyranny isn't freedom, it's damnation. I've seen this with my own eyes since my resurrection. Every world the Astronomican's light doesn't reach falls to chaos within generations. Not because they choose corruption, but because they have no defense against it. Farseer Lathriel's voice cut through the defense. The Monkey Primarch speaks as though the Emperor's dominion is humanity's only salvation. But my people survive without such a tyrant. The infinity circuits preserve our souls. The paths channel our emotions. We face the same chaos. God's the Imperium does, more directly as she who thirsts hungers specifically for Eldari souls. Yet we persist without building an empire of corpses. Your species had millions of years to develop your defenses. The Emperor's response was sharp. Humanity's psychic awakening happened in geological instants. We did not have the luxury of gradual adaptation, and your people's survival comes at the cost of your extinction. Eldar birth rates decline while humanity grows. Your path may be more elegant, but it is still a path to oblivion. So your argument, Q interjected, is that humanity had no choice but to embrace tyranny because evolution didn't give you enough time to develop alternatives? That's remarkably convenient. Convenient does not mean false. A new witness materialized, an unexpected addition that made even Q pause. Saint Celestine appeared in the gallery, the living saint of the Adepta Sororitas, her armor gleaming with holy light, her wings of pure faith spreading behind her. She looked at the Emperor's projection with devotion that bordered on worship, then turned to Q with determination etched in her features. I am proof of the Emperor's protection, Celestine declared. I have died 17 times in his service and been resurrected 17 times by his will. I have fought demons on worlds where the Astronomican's light barely reaches. I have seen firsthand what happens when humanity stands without the Emperor's guidance: corruption, possession, damnation. The imperial cult you mock provides billions of humans with the faith necessary to resist chaos. Our prayers are not superstition, they are weapons. Q regarded her with fascination. You died 17 times for a corpse on a throne, and you call that protection? Saint Celestine, you're a victim of the system claiming to be its champion. The Emperor's protection requires your death repeatedly to function. How is that different from the Chaos Gods demanding sacrifice? Celestine's expression hardened. Because the Emperor asks sacrifice in service of humanity's survival, Chaos demands sacrifice to feed its hunger. The Emperor preserves souls, Chaos devours them. That distinction matters. Does it? Q gestured, and the courtroom showed new visions. imperial worlds where the ecclesiarchy burned thousands at the stake for heresy, where Sisters of Battle purged entire hive levels in the Emperor's name, where faith became justification for atrocities identical to those committed by Chaos cultists. Your faith produces the same results as Chaos worship: bodies, ashes, screaming. The only difference is which authority demands the slaughter. The difference, Inquisitor Voke interjected, is intent and outcome. Yes, the Imperium conducts purges. Yes, we execute heretics and burn the corrupt. But these actions prevent greater catastrophes. I've purged worlds to stop demonic incursions that would have spread across entire sectors. Every life I take prevents thousands more from falling to chaos. The calculus is brutal, but it's necessary. Sergeant Hadrian stood again. Is it? I've served 40 years in the Imperial Guard. I've watched commissars execute soldiers for retreating from impossible battles. I've seen civilians bombed because they couldn't meet production quotas. I've witnessed the Imperium grind up human lives like ammunition, and every time the justification is the same: necessary for survival. At what point does survival stop being worth the cost? The Emperor's projection turned to face the sergeant. When the alternative is worse than the cost. Show him, Q shows Sergeant Hadrian, what happens to worlds that choose mercy over discipline. Q snapped his fingers and the courtroom displayed another alternate timeline. Timeline Beta. The Imperium adopts leniency as policy. The vision showed an Imperium where mercy tempered brutality, where commissars didn't execute retreating soldiers, where production quotas allowed for human dignity, where the Inquisition investigated before purging. At first, the results seemed positive. Civilian morale improved, worlds prospered, innovation cautiously resumed. Then Chaos noticed. Cultists spread through the lenient worlds like cancer, exploiting mercy as weakness. Demons infiltrated populations the Inquisition had chosen to spare. Governors compromised by Chaos twisted the Imperium's mercy into tools for corruption. Within 3 generations, entire sectors fell, not through military conquest, but through the gradual erosion of vigilance. The vision ended with those same merciful worlds transformed into demon-infested hellscapes, their populations sacrificed to the dark gods, while screaming that they'd only wanted compassion. This is why the Imperium cannot afford mercy. The Emperor's voice was iron. Chaos exploits every weakness. Every moment of compassion becomes an opening for corruption. The Imperium's brutality is not cruelty for its own sake, it is immune response. When the body is infected, you cut out the disease before it spreads, even if healthy tissue must be sacrificed. Q studied the vision with unreadable expression. So your defense rests on the claim that humanity has no choice, that the galaxy's nature forces you into tyranny, that chaos makes compassion suicidal, that survival requires eternal vigilance enforced through terror. He looked at the assembled witnesses. Is this true? Is the Imperium's horror truly the only viable path? Or is it possible the Emperor created a self-fulfilling prophecy, building a system so brutal that any alternative seems like weakness? The courtroom held its breath, waiting for an answer that would determine the trial's direction. Argel Tal rose from the gallery, his demon-fused form casting shadows that moved independently of the light. The word-bearer's voice carried bitter wisdom earned through millennia serving the ruinous powers. The Emperor speaks of necessity as though his choices were forced upon him, Argel Tal said. But I've lived the alternative he refuses to acknowledge. In the eye of terror, we've built civilizations, twisted, yes, corrupted, certainly, but functioning societies where humans wield chaos without being consumed by it. The Imperium teaches that chaos contact means instant damnation, but that's propaganda. Chaos offers power, and power can be controlled by those strong enough to master it. You are a slave, the Emperor responded. You believe yourself free because your chains are comfortable. But every Chaos champion serves the Dark God's whims, whether they acknowledge it or not. Your civilization exists only because the ruinous powers allow it. The moment you cease to amuse them, they will discard you like broken toys. As you discarded the Thunder Warriors, Argyle Tal countered. As you plan to discard the Space Marines once the Great Crusade ended, at least Chaos is honest about its nature. You pretended to be humanity's savior while treating us as weapons. Honsu laughed, the sound grinding and harsh. The Emperor condemns Chaos for offering power through corruption, yet he built the Astronomicon by sacrificing thousands of psychers daily. He condemns the Dark Gods for demanding worship while building an imperium that deifies him. The hypocrisy is stunning. Hugh leaned forward with interest. The witnesses make compelling points. Emperor, you've claimed moral superiority over Chaos, but your methods often mirror theirs. Both systems demand sacrifice. Both consume human lives to sustain themselves. Both enforce absolute loyalty through terror. What makes the Imperium different from Chaos beyond which master you serve? The Emperor's projection blazed with sudden fury. The difference is purpose. Chaos feeds on humanity's suffering for its own pleasure. The Imperium's sacrifices serve humanity's survival. Every psyker fed to the Golden Throne dies, so billions can navigate the warp safely. Every world purged prevents sectors from falling. The suffering is not the goal, it is the price. A price you decided was acceptable, Q observed, without consulting those who would pay it. Because those who pay it lack the perspective to understand why it's necessary. The Emperor's voice carried frustration. A hive worker cannot comprehend the strategic necessities of galactic governance. A guardsman cannot see the calculations that determine which worlds must be defended and which must be abandoned. Democracy is suicide when the populace lacks the information to make informed decisions. So you justify tyranny through superior knowledge, Q said, the classic dictator's argument. I know better than you, so I'll make your choices for you. Tell me, Emperor, at what point does that logic become identical to Chaos's corruption? The Dark Gods also claim to offer power and knowledge to those who serve them. They also argue their way is best. The difference seems merely one of branding. A new witness appeared, Uriah Olathair, the last priest of the Catholic faith, pulled from the moment before his death during the Unification Wars. The old man looked around the impossible courtroom with serene confusion before focusing on the Emperor's projection. "My lord," Uriah said, his voice gentle despite facing the being who had destroyed his church. "I remember our conversation in the ruined chapel. You told me then that you rejected divinity, that humanity must stand on reason rather than faith. Yet you built an empire that demands absolute loyalty, unquestioning obedience, and sacrifice without explanation. You claimed you were not a god while acting as one in all but name. I sought to free humanity from religious delusion," the Emperor responded, and something in his voice suggested old regret. "But humanity needs meaning beyond survival. I understood that too late. By denying them faith, I created a void that the Lectitio Divinitatus eventually filled. Perhaps," Uriah said softly, "if you had trusted humanity with truth rather than imposing enlightenment through force, we might have found meaning that didn't require your deification. Faith and reason need not be enemies, yet you made them so through your imperial truth." Q nodded. "The priest identifies another fundamental flaw in your approach. You imposed rationality without understanding humanity's psychological needs. You eliminated religion without providing alternative sources of meaning. Then you act surprised when humanity deified you despite your wishes. He gestured at Saint Celestine. Your living saint there worships you as a god. The entire Imperium functions on faith in the God Emperor. Your atheistic vision has been completely subverted, yet the Imperium continues. Doesn't that suggest your original philosophy was flawed? Or it suggests humanity's weakness? The Emperor's voice hardened. They could not bear the truth, that the universe is indifferent, that no gods care for their fate, that survival depends solely on their own strength. So they created a god from my corpse and found comfort in delusion. Celestine's expression shifted from devotion to something more complex, hurt mixed with determination. You call our faith delusion, yet it manifests real power. My resurrections are not imagined. The sisters' acts of faith produce measurable results. The Emperor's protection is tangible to those who serve him. Perhaps the faith is not delusion, but evolution. Humanity adapting to the warp's nature by channeling belief into defensive power. Gilliman spoke again, his analytical mind dissecting the theological argument. Father, I've considered this extensively since my return. The imperial cult you despise has become humanity's most effective defense against chaos. The chaos gods draw power from emotion. The imperial cult channels that same emotional energy into faith that resists corruption. It's not the system you designed, but it functions. Perhaps better than your original vision would have. It functions at the cost of stagnation. The Emperor's projection dimmed. The Mechanicus worships technology rather than understanding it. The ecclesiarchy burns innovators as heretics. Every new idea is suspect, every change condemned. Humanity has not advanced in 10,000 years because faith replaced reason as the Imperium's foundation. Then whose fault is that? Q pressed. You built the institutions that became ossified. You created the precedent of absolute authority that made questioning heresy. You established the pattern of purging dissent that made innovation suicidal. The Imperium's stagnation isn't a corruption of your vision. It's your vision taken to its logical conclusion. Total control inevitably becomes total paralysis. Farseer Lathriel added her voice, musical and cutting. The Mon-Ki Emperor speaks of stagnation as though it were accidental, but stagnation serves the Imperium's purposes. A population that questions nothing, that innovates nothing, that simply obeys. These are easy to control. The Imperium's calcification protects not humanity, but the power structure the Emperor created. Even entombed, he remains the center of everything, the point around which all humanity orbits. That's not protection, that's parasitism. I did not choose this. The Emperor's voice cracked, genuine anguish bleeding through. I fought Horus to prevent chaos from claiming humanity. I accepted the Golden Throne to seal the webway breach. I have endured 10,000 years of agony, not from desire for power, but because the alternative is humanity's extinction. Every moment I suffer, billions live who would otherwise die. If that is parasitism, then what would you call letting them perish? Silence fell across the courtroom, heavy with the weight of impossible choices. Q stood from his judge's bench and walked to the center of the space. His omnipotent presence suddenly less theatrical and more genuinely thoughtful. This is the core of the trial, isn't it? Not whether the Imperium is brutal. That's established fact. Not whether you made mistakes. You've admitted those. The real question is whether your continued existence serves humanity or imprisons it. Whether the galaxy would be better off if you simply died and let humanity find its own path forward. The Emperor's projection faced Q directly, and in that moment every witness saw the ancient being's exhaustion, the weight of millennia bearing consciousness without hope of rest or relief. Ask them. The Emperor's voice was barely a whisper. Ask humanity if they would prefer my death to my protection. Let them choose. Very well, Q said. Let's hear from humanity itself. Q snapped his fingers, and the gallery filled with new witnesses, not champions or heroes, but ordinary humans drawn from across the Imperium's million worlds. Hive workers still bearing chemical burns from their manufactorums, agri-world farmers whose hands were calloused from endless labor, void-born crew from trading vessels who'd never seen a planet's surface, scribes from the administratum who'd spent entire lives processing single documents. Each represented billions of their fellows, the masses whose suffering sustained the Imperium's existence. You want humanity's voice? Q addressed the Emperor. Here it is, not filtered through your custodians or interpreted by your primarchs, the people whose lives you claim to protect. He turned to the assembled citizens. You've heard the charges against the Emperor. You've witnessed evidence of the Imperium's brutality. Now I offer you a choice. Should the Emperor die and free humanity from his control, or should he continue his eternal suffering to maintain the Imperium's protection? A hive worker stepped forward first, a woman named Kalessa, whose augmetic eye marked her as a manufactorum supervisor. Her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd worked 18-hour shifts since childhood. I don't understand the politics or philosophy, Kalessa said. I only know that my hive produces weapons for the Imperial Guard. We work until we die because that's what the Emperor requires. Our children are born into debt. Our elderly are recycled into corpse starch when they can't work anymore. Every day is suffering. She paused, looking at the Emperor's projection. But last year, demons broke through into the lower levels. The priests led us in prayer to the God Emperor, and somehow, impossibly, we pushed them back. The Emperor's light protected us when nothing else could. So yes, the Imperium is brutal, but it's the only thing standing between us and hell. Another voice rose, an agri-world farmer named Johan, his weathered face scarred by decades of exposure to toxic sun. I've tithed my harvest to the administratum my entire life. 90% of everything I grow goes off-world to feed soldiers I'll never meet, fighting wars I'll never understand. My son was conscripted into the Guard 20 years ago. I don't know if he's alive or dead. The Imperium took everything from me. He looked at Q with haunted eyes. But if the Emperor dies and the Imperium falls, who'll protect my world from the Xenos who'd enslave us? Who'll stop the pirates who'd burn our fields? At least the Imperium's tyranny is human tyranny. The alternatives are worse. Q listened to more testimonies, a scribe who'd processed execution orders for 50 years, a void-born merchant who'd witnessed orbital bombardments, a child from a shrine world who'd been raised to worship the Emperor before learning to read. Each story was unique, but the pattern was consistent. Suffering under the Imperium, terror at the thought of losing its protection. Fascinating, Q observed. They know the Imperium is evil, yet they defend it because they're more afraid of what lies beyond its borders. That's not loyalty, that's hostage psychology. Inquisitor Voke stood once more. It's pragmatism. Q. You've shown alternate timelines where the Emperor made different choices. Now let me show you something from our reality. The historical record of what happens to human worlds when the Imperium's protection fails. The courtroom walls displayed documented history. The fall of Cadia, where billions fought to their last breath against the 13th Black Crusade. The devastation of Baal, where the Blood Angels faced extinction against High Fleet Leviathan. The Plague Wars, where Nurgle's corruption spread across Ultramar despite desperate resistance. Worlds screaming for salvation that came too late, or not at all. Every image you see represents billions of dead, Voke continued. Not because the Imperium is cruel, but because even the Imperium's total military might isn't enough to protect everyone. We're fighting a war on every front simultaneously: chaos, Xenos, heretics from within. The Emperor's light through the Astronomicon is the only thing allowing us to coordinate defense across the galaxy. Without it, every world stands alone against the darkness. So your argument, Q said, remains that the ends justify the means, that humanity's survival requires accepting tyranny, stagnation, and perpetual warfare. Not just accepting it, Guilliman interjected, understanding that there are no alternatives available. Father, I've spent considerable time since my resurrection attempting to reform the Imperium. Every attempt meets the same wall. The system is too large, too calcified, too dependent on existing structures to change without collapsing. The Imperium isn't an empire anymore. It's a geological formation. You can't reform geology through policy. You can only work within its constraints. The Emperor's projections seem to shrink, diminishing under the weight of 10,000 years of consequences. Robout speaks truth. The Imperium has become something beyond my control or design. It exists now as its own entity, sustained by momentum and necessity. I am merely the psychic engine that keeps the Astronomicon burning. My consciousness, such as it remains, has little influence over policy or doctrine. Then why continue? Q asked gently, his theatrical nature dropping away to reveal genuine curiosity. If you've become a battery rather than a ruler, if the Imperium functions without your conscious input, if your suffering serves only to maintain a system you never intended to create, why not simply let go? Allow yourself to die. Force humanity to find another way. Because there is no other way. The Emperor's projection blazed again with desperate conviction. The Astronomicon requires psychic power on a scale only I can provide. The webway breach beneath Terra would flood the planet with daemons within hours of my death. The Emperor's tarot that guides the Inquisition, the protection that keeps chaos from overwhelming humanity's psychers, the beacon that prevents the warp from swallowing all human shipping, all of it depends on my continued existence. My death would not free humanity. It would doom them. Argel Tal's laugh echoed through the courtroom, bitter and knowing. Or it would force humanity to evolve. The Emperor speaks of his indispensability as fact, but it's also convenient, isn't it? As long as he's necessary, his tyranny is justified. As long as he suffers, humanity must be grateful. But what if he's wrong? What if humanity could survive his death? Chaotic, difficult, but possible. Timeline Gamma, Q announced, snapping his fingers. The courtroom displayed a new alternate future, the Emperor's death. The Golden Throne failed, the Astronomicon died, Terra fell to demonic invasion through the webway breach. Across the galaxy, human worlds lost their navigation beacon, shipping ground to halt, communication between sectors ceased. The Imperium fragmented into isolated regions, each facing annihilation alone. But then, adaptation. Some worlds fell immediately, consumed by chaos or Xenos, but others survived. Local psychers working in concert created lesser Astronomicons, lighting beacons across limited regions. New methods of warp travel emerged, slower and more dangerous but functional. Technology stagnated by the Mechanicus's doctrine was rediscovered by desperate populations. Humanity splintered into thousands of isolated civilizations, each finding its own path to survival. 10,000 years later, humanity existed in dramatically different form, smaller total population, but more diverse, more adaptive, more innovative. Some human cultures had fallen to chaos, yes, but others had found genuine alternatives. The unified Imperium was gone, replaced by competing human civilizations that resembled the Imperium no more than the Imperium resembled the Federation from Q's home universe. "Interesting," Q murmured as the vision ended. "Humanity survives your death. Changed, reduced, but alive. Not the extinction you predicted. At the cost of trillions." The Emperor's voice was hollow. "Your vision shows the survivors, but does not dwell on the countless dead. Every world that fell in the transition held billions. Your adaptation was purchased with an ocean of blood." "All your choices have been purchased with blood," Q countered. "The question is whether the blood price of maintaining the Imperium is greater or lesser than the blood price of allowing it to fall. You claim your death dooms humanity, but the evidence suggests it merely transforms them. Perhaps painfully, perhaps traumatically, but not fatally." Saint Celestine rose, her wings spreading with holy light. "You dare suggest the Emperor should abandon humanity, that he should choose oblivion over service? His suffering is sacred. His sacrifice maintains the Imperium across 10,000 years. Without his light, we would be lost in darkness." "Or," Q suggested, "you would learn to generate your own light. The Emperor has become humanity's crutch. You lean on him rather than standing independently. Every generation that passes makes you more dependent, less capable of survival without him. He's not protecting you, he's infantilizing you." The Emperor's projection flickered, and for a moment, ancient doubt showed through the golden mask. "Perhaps. You are correct." The admission sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Celestine gasped, Guilliman's expression hardened, and even Q looked genuinely surprised. The Emperor's projection steadied, but something had fundamentally shifted in his presence. The absolute certainty that had characterized every previous statement now carried threads of ancient doubt, regrets suppressed across millennia of endless suffering. "I have considered this," the Emperor continued, his voice quieter than before. "In the rare moments when my consciousness can spare attention from maintaining the Astronomicon, I have asked myself whether my continued existence serves humanity or merely sustains a system that should be allowed to die. There are times, brief, agonizing moments of clarity, when I believe my greatest service would be to simply let go." Guilliman stepped forward, his voice sharp with urgency. "Father, you cannot mean this. The Imperium would collapse within days of your death. I've seen the strategic assessments. Without the Astronomicon, our naval coordination fails. Without your presence sealing the webway breach, Terra falls. Without your psychic protection, every human psyker becomes a doorway for demons. The survival of our species depends on your endurance." "Does it?" The Emperor turned to his son. "Or does my endurance simply postpone the inevitable?" Q's timeline showed humanity surviving my death. Changed, yes. Diminished in numbers, certainly. But alive and perhaps impossibly more vital than the stagnant empire that worships my corpse. You would gamble trillions of lives on perhaps? Inquisitor Voke's voice carried barely controlled fury. The Emperor's doubt is evidence of his burden, not wisdom. Q manipulates through selective evidence, showing futures where humanity survives while glossing over the unimaginable suffering required for that survival. I've spent my life fighting chaos. I know what waits in the darkness. Without the Emperor's light, humanity doesn't evolve. It dies screaming. Q leaned back in his judge's seat, watching the defense fracture with evident satisfaction. The Inquisitor reveals the Imperium's core pathology, an addiction to the Emperor's protection so complete that even considering alternatives seems like heresy. You've become a civilization that cannot imagine existence without your corpse god. That's not loyalty, it's codependency on a galactic scale. Farseer Lathriel spoke, her voice carrying the weight of genuine compassion beneath her species' arrogance. I have watched the Mon-Ki Imperium for thousands of years. My people debated whether to aid you or allow you to destroy yourselves. But I see now that the Emperor's greatest crime was not his brutality or his lies. It was making himself indispensable. He built a cage so comprehensive that humanity cannot imagine freedom from it. We don't want freedom from it, Kalessa, the hive worker, shouted from the gallery. You speak from positions of power, inquisitors with authority, primarchs with armies, xenos with ancient knowledge. But I'm just a manufactorum supervisor trying to keep my workers alive. The Emperor's protection is the only thing between us and horrors we can't fight. Take that away, and we die. It's that simple. Is it? Q addressed the hive worker directly. What if the Emperor's protection is what keeps you helpless? What if by doing all the protecting, he prevents humanity from developing its own defenses? You pray to him because you've never learned to stand alone. You worship him because he's made sure you have no other choice. Argel Tal rose again, his corrupted form radiating warp-tainted wisdom. Q speaks truth. In the Eye of Terror, we've learned to stand without the Emperor's light. It required transformation, accepting chaos, embracing power from the warp itself. But we survived. Humanity could do the same, stop fighting chaos, and instead learn to channel it, wield it, master it. That is damnation, not survival. The Emperor's voice hardened. You believe yourself free, word-bearer, but you are a slave to the Dark God's whims. Chaos promises power, but delivers only corruption. There is no coexistence with the ruinous powers, only resistance or submission. Then resist properly, Q said, not by denying chaos exists, not by building an imperium of enforced ignorance, but by teaching humanity the truth and trusting them to make their own choices. You fear that knowledge of chaos leads to corruption, but your secrecy guaranteed the heresy. Magnus might have resisted temptation if he'd understood what he faced. Lorgar might not have sought gods if you'd explained why divinity was dangerous, rather than simply forbidding faith. Uriah Olathair, the old priest, spoke again with gentle insight. The Emperor's flaw has always been his inability to trust. He trusts his own power, his own wisdom, his own calculations. But he does not trust humanity to understand complexity, to make hard choices, to resist temptation through informed decision rather than enforced ignorance. That lack of trust manifests as tyranny. The Emperor's projections seem to age before their eyes, the golden light dimming to something more human, more vulnerable. You speak as though trust is simple, as though I could simply tell humanity the truth and expect wisdom. But I have lived among humans since their birth as a species. I have seen their capacity for both greatness and horror. They are capable of extraordinary compassion and breathtaking cruelty, often in the same breath. How do you trust a species so contradictory? By accepting the contradiction, Q answered. Humanity in my universe faces similar challenges, not chaos, but other existential threats. The difference is their leadership treats them as partners in survival, rather than children to be protected. Yes, sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes those mistakes cost lives, but they learn, adapt, grow. Your humanity is stunted because you never gave them the chance to mature. Guilliman's expression shifted as comprehension dawned. Father, is Q right? Have you kept humanity deliberately dependent? When you created the Imperium, was it always intended as a temporary structure until humanity could stand alone? Or did you always plan to remain its eternal ruler? The Emperor's projection flickered, and the silence stretched. I do not know. The admission was devastating. My intentions shifted over millennia. Initially, yes, I planned to guide humanity to a point where my direct rule would be unnecessary. The Webway project was meant to free humanity from warp dependence. The imperial truth was meant to prepare them for a future without gods or tyrants. But then the heresy happened. The Webway failed. I was entombed, and in 10,000 years of suffering, holding back the darkness. Second by second, my original intentions became unclear. Lost in the bureaucracy of godhood, Q observed, you became what you never intended to be, a deity worshipped by billions who depend on you completely, and now you're trapped by your own necessity. Even if you wanted to free humanity, even if you recognized your presence prevents their growth, you cannot release them without killing them. Unless, Saint Celestine said softly, her faith wavering for the first time, there was another way, a transition, a path from dependence to independence that doesn't require the Emperor's immediate death. All eyes turned to the living saint, and she continued with growing conviction. What if the Emperor's power could be shared, distributed among humanity's most powerful psychers, not replacing him immediately, but gradually diffusing his function across thousands of individuals? The Astronomicon could be maintained by a choir rather than a single source. The Webway seal could be reinforced by rotating psychers. The protection he provides could become collective rather than individual. The Emperor's projection focused on Celestine with something approaching hope. That was always the plan. The Webway project would have made the Astronomicon unnecessary. The Great Crusade would have gathered enough psychic potential to distribute my burden. But both failed. The infrastructure required for your vision does not exist. Then build it, Guilliman said, his strategic mind seizing the possibility. Not overnight. Not in a single generation, but across centuries, develop the mechanisms to transition from emperor dependence to collective resistance. Train psychers not just to die for the Astronomicon, but to maintain it. Research alternatives to warp travel. Create genuine defenses against chaos that don't require your direct intervention. A beautiful vision, Hanso said mockingly. Except the Imperium's entire structure resists change. The Mechanicus forbids innovation. The Ecclesiarchy burns reformers as heretics. The Administratum takes centuries to process simple reforms. You speak of building new infrastructure as though the Imperium is capable of adaptation. It's not. It's a corpse animated by momentum and terror. Q stood from his bench and walked to the center of the courtroom. This is the crux of the matter. The Emperor admits his original vision failed. His current existence maintains a system he never intended to create. His continued suffering doesn't protect humanity so much as prevent them from learning to protect themselves. Yet the Imperium structure makes evolution nearly impossible. So, the question becomes, is a quick death and chaotic rebirth preferable to slow stagnation and eventual extinction? The courtroom fell silent, every witness confronting the impossible choice. Q surveyed the courtroom, his omnipotent gaze moving across each witness, the corrupted, the faithful, the broken, and the devoted. When he spoke, his voice carried none of its usual theatrical mockery, only the weight of genuine judgment. We've heard testimony from all sides, Q said, evidence of the Imperium's brutality and its necessity. Arguments for the Emperor's indispensability and his culpability. Now we approach the verdict, but first I want to hear from the accused one final time. He turned to the Emperor's dimming projection. You've defended your choices, admitted your failures, and acknowledged your doubts. But answer me this. If you could do it all again, knowing everything you know now, the heresy, the Imperium's corruption, 10,000 years of stagnation and suffering, would you make the same choices? The Emperor's projection stood silent for a long moment, golden light flickering as he drew on reserves that were killing psychers back in the throne room with every passing second. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the full weight of his ancient existence. No. The single word resonated through the impossible courtroom. If I possessed foreknowledge of all that would transpire, I would have chosen differently. I would have trusted my sons with the truth about chaos, regardless of the risks. I would have built the Imperium with mechanisms for evolution rather than static control. I would have prepared humanity for my eventual absence rather than making myself indispensable. I would have been a father before being an emperor. Guilliman's expression showed pain and validation in equal measure. The admission was what he'd needed to hear for 10,000 years. But I did not have foreknowledge, the Emperor continued. I made each decision with imperfect information, facing threats that could exterminate humanity if I hesitated or chose wrong. I calculated, I strategized, I sacrificed, and yes, I failed. The Imperium that exists now is a monument to my failures, not my vision. Every atrocity committed in my name, every life ground up by the Administratum's machinery, every innovation burned as heresy. All of it flows from my original choices. So you accept responsibility, Q said. Not just for your direct actions, but for the system you created and the trajectory you set in motion. I do. The Emperor's projection seemed to gain substance despite its dimming light. I am guilty of every charge you have leveled. Genocide, tyranny, enforced stagnation, transformation of humanity into a species that worships suffering as virtue. I did not intend these outcomes, but intent matters less than result. The road to the current Imperium was paved with my necessities and justified cruelties. Argel Tal laughed, but the sound carried no triumph. An admission of guilt from the master of mankind. I thought I'd never witness such a thing. Does this mean you'll finally accept damnation as your due? Damnation is not mine to accept or refuse. The Emperor's voice hardened. Q has put me on trial, but the true question isn't my guilt. That's established. The question is whether humanity's survival justifies my continued existence despite that guilt. Whether a flawed, failed God Emperor is better than no protection at all. Exactly, Q said. So let's address that question directly. I'm going to do something I rarely do. I'm going to show you absolute truth. No alternate timelines, no speculation. Just raw, unfiltered reality of what happens if the Emperor dies today. Q snapped his fingers and the courtroom transformed into a vast display of simultaneous events across the galaxy. The witnesses watched in horror as the scenario unfolded with documentary precision. The Golden Throne failed. The Emperor's consciousness, freed from its 10,000-year prison, finally dissipated into the warp. For one brief moment, a wave of golden light swept across the galaxy, the Emperor's final psychic scream, before fading forever. Terra fell within hours. The webway breach, no longer sealed, erupted with demonic hordes. Custodians fought valiantly but were overwhelmed. The Imperial Palace became a demon world, billions of souls consumed before the planet was finally destroyed by Exterminatus from orbit. The Astronomicon died. Across the galaxy, ships lost their navigation beacon mid-journey. Some emerged from the warp in real space light years from their destinations. Others never emerged at all, lost in the Immaterium's currents. Imperial coordination collapsed as sectors lost contact with each other. But then, adaptation began. Forge worlds weaponized their surviving STCs, creating automated defense networks the Mechanicus had forbidden for millennia. Psychers, no longer funneled to feed the Golden Throne, formed new choir networks maintaining localized Astronomicons. Space Marine chapters became regional protectors rather than Imperium-wide assets. The Inquisition splintered into competing factions, some maintaining imperial doctrine, others embracing necessary heresies. Within a century, humanity had fragmented into hundreds of successor states. Many fell to chaos or Xenos, but others survived, smaller, harder, more adaptable. Innovation returned as necessity. Some human civilizations even forged genuine alliances with Tau, Eldar, or other minor species, creating mixed-culture defensive pacts. 10,000 years later, humanity existed in radically different form. Total population was perhaps a tenth of the Imperium's peak, scattered across isolated regions rather than united galaxy-wide. But they were evolving, changing, adapting in ways the stagnant Imperium never could. Some had fallen to chaos. Yes, but others had found genuinely new paths. The vision ended, and Q let the implications settle over the courtroom. That is what happens if the Emperor dies today, Q said quietly. Not extinction, not damnation. Transformation, painful, traumatic, costly, but survivable. Humanity endures because that's what humanity does. You survived the age of strife. You survived the heresy. You'll survive the Emperor's death. The question is whether you should be forced to. Saint Celestine's voice was barely a whisper. Billions would die in the transition. Billions die every day maintaining the current system, Q countered. The Astronomicon consumes thousands of psychers daily. The Imperium's wars grind up entire generations. Hive worlds sacrifice populations to maintain production quotas. The only difference is you've accepted those deaths as necessary while viewing the deaths from transition as tragedy. But they're the same currency, lives spent in the name of survival. Inquisitor Vogue stood, his face twisted with anguish. You're asking us to choose between the devil we know and the chaos we don't. The Imperium is brutal, yes, but it's stable, it's predictable. We know how to survive within its structure. Your vision shows humanity enduring the Emperor's death, but at what cost to those who live through the transition? The cost of freedom, Q said simply. The price of evolution. The Emperor built a cage so comprehensive you've forgotten what it's like to fly. I'm offering to open the door. Yes, some will fall, but others will soar. The Emperor's projection blazed one final time. Q, you have made your point. You have proven the Imperium's flaws, my failures, and humanity's capacity to survive without me. But there is one element you have not considered: choice. You speak of freeing humanity, but you would make that choice for them. Just as I made choices for humanity during the Great Crusade, you now position yourself to decide their fate. Q paused, and something like respect crossed his features. You're right, Q admitted. I've been judging whether humanity deserves to survive, whether you deserve to continue existing. But that's the same error you made, assuming I know better than humanity itself what's best for them. He looked at the assembled witnesses. So let's do something neither of us has done. Let's ask humanity what they want. He gestured, and the courtroom expanded to include billions of voices, not physically present, but psychically connected. Every human in the Imperium suddenly aware of the trial, able to hear the testimony, see the evidence, understand the choice. Humanity, Q's voice echoed across the galaxy. You've heard the case against your Emperor. You've seen what the Imperium has become and what might replace it. The question is simple. Should the Emperor die and free you to find your own path? Or should he continue his suffering to maintain your protection? The answer came not in words, but in overwhelming psychic consensus, a billion voices speaking as one, and the response split perfectly down the middle. Q regarded the cosmic deadlock with something approaching admiration. half of humanity crying out for the Emperor's continued protection, half demanding freedom from his control, perfect equilibrium that rendered judgment impossible through democratic means. Fascinating, Q said. Humanity can't even agree on whether they want to survive under tyranny or risk freedom. That tells me everything I need to know. He returned to his judge's bench, his expression unreadable. Very well. I've heard the testimony. I've examined the evidence. I've witnessed humanity's own division on the matter. Now I render my verdict. The courtroom fell absolutely silent, every witness holding breath they didn't technically need in this impossible space. The Emperor of Mankind is guilty, Q pronounced. Guilty of every charge I leveled: genocide, tyranny, enforced stagnation, and the transformation of humanity into a species that worships suffering. These are facts, not interpretations. The Imperium is a monument to necessary evil that has become simply evil, necessity having been forgotten in the machinery of perpetual war. The Emperor's projection accepted this without protest. However, Q continued, guilt does not determine sentence. The question before this court was never whether the Emperor was guilty, but whether humanity deserves to survive given what they've become under his rule. And after examining all evidence, I've reached a conclusion that surprised even me. He stood, his omnipotent presence filling the courtroom. Humanity deserves to survive, not despite the Imperium's evil, but because of how you've struggled against it. I've watched Saint Celestine die 17 times defending others. I've seen Guilliman return to an Imperium he barely recognizes and immediately begin working to reform it. I've witnessed ordinary humans like Sergeant Hadrian and Kalessa maintain compassion despite living in a system designed to crush it. The Imperium's brutality hasn't destroyed humanity's capacity for goodness. It's made that goodness more precious because it persists against all odds. Celestine's eyes shone with tears. Guilliman's expression shifted to cautious hope. But, Q said, his voice hardening, surviving is not the same as thriving. The current system is unsustainable. The Emperor himself admits it. 10,000 years of stagnation cannot continue indefinitely. Eventually, the Imperium will collapse under its own weight. The only question is whether that collapse is controlled or catastrophic. He turned to the Emperor's projection. So here's my judgment. I will not kill you, Emperor, nor will I force you to live. Instead, I'm going to do something more difficult. I'm going to give you a genuine choice, free from necessity's constraints. Q snapped his fingers and the courtroom transformed one final time. The Emperor's projection suddenly solidified, becoming more substantial than it had been since the trial began. The constant drain on the golden throne ceased. Q had temporarily suspended the need for the Astronomicon, sealed the webway breach, stabilized every crisis that demanded the Emperor's attention. For the next 60 seconds of galactic time, you are free, Q told the Emperor. Completely free. The Astronomicon maintains itself. Terra is safe. Humanity doesn't need you. You can choose to die, truly die, finally rest after 10 millennia of suffering, and I'll ensure humanity survives the transition. Or you can choose to continue, but with full understanding that you're choosing ongoing suffering, not because it's necessary, but because you believe it's right. The Emperor's now solid form stood in the courtroom's center, truly free for the first time since the Horus Heresy. His face, no longer a projection but a genuine manifestation, showed every year of his ancient existence. You would give me death as a gift? The Emperor's voice was wonder and suspicion mixed. I'd give you choice as a gift, Q corrected. Something you've lacked since you accepted the Golden Throne. Something you rarely gave humanity. Choose freely, and I'll enforce whatever you decide. Die and be at peace. Or live and continue your work. But make the choice consciously, not from necessity. The Emperor looked at his hands, solid, real, free from the throne's prison. He could feel the absence of pain for the first time in 10,000 years, the constant psychic strain, the endless agony, the burden of holding back chaos, all temporarily lifted. Then he looked at the assembled witnesses. Guilliman, his son who'd returned to a nightmare, Celestine, who'd died repeatedly in his name, the ordinary humans who suffered daily under his imperium, the corrupted ones who'd fallen because of his failures, all of them waiting to see what he would choose. I choose. The Emperor's voice was quiet but certain, to continue. Shock rippled through the courtroom. You choose suffering, Q asked. When I offer you peace, I choose responsibility. The Emperor's solid form began to fade as Q's temporal suspension lifted, the needs of the Imperium reasserting themselves. My failures created this system. My choices led to the Imperium's current state. I do not have the right to escape through death while humanity suffers the consequences of my actions. If there is any path to reform, any possibility of transition from dependence to independence, then I must endure to guide it. Not as tyrant, but as servant. Guilliman stepped forward. Father, if that's your choice, then let me help carry the burden. We'll begin the work, Celestine suggested. Distributing your functions, building infrastructure for transition. It may take millennia, but we'll create a path for humanity to survive without you. And if we fail, the Emperor asked, if the transition proves impossible, then at least we'll have tried, Guilliman responded. At least we'll have given humanity the chance to evolve rather than stagnate. Q watched this exchange with satisfaction. Very well. The Emperor chooses to live, but with commitment to eventual transition. Humanity chooses to struggle toward freedom rather than accept comfortable slavery. That's acceptable. He raised his hand. This trial is concluded. The verdict is guilty but necessary. The sentence is continue existing, but work toward making yourself unnecessary. Humanity is not condemned. You're given the chance to evolve. Don't waste it. The courtroom began to dissolve as Q prepared to release time from its freeze. Wait, Inquisitor Voke called out. What guarantee do we have that the Emperor will follow through? That the Imperium will actually change? Q smiled. None whatsoever. That's the beauty of free will. You get to make your own choices and live with the consequences. The Emperor could revert to tyranny the moment I leave. Humanity could reject reform and embrace stagnation. Or you might actually build something better. I don't know, and more importantly, I'm not going to control the outcome. He looked at the Emperor's fading projection. I tested humanity once before in another universe. They passed by, showing they could grow. Now I'm testing you again. Show me that suffering can lead to wisdom. Prove that even the God Emperor can learn from his mistakes. The Emperor's projection met Q's gaze. And if we fail, then I'll come back in another 10,000 years and put you on trial again, Q said cheerfully. Consider it motivation. The courtroom collapsed. Time resumed. The Emperor's consciousness snapped back into the Golden Throne's eternal agony, but now carried with it something it hadn't possessed in 10 millennia, purpose beyond mere endurance. Across the galaxy, every witness of the trial returned to their proper moments, memories of the impossible courtroom fading like dreams, but leaving lasting impressions. On Terra, the High Lords suddenly found themselves receiving unusual psychic communications from the Golden Throne. Not commands, but suggestions. Guilliman discovered his reform efforts meeting less institutional resistance, as though the Imperium itself was willing to consider change. The Mechanicus experienced unprecedented visions of lost STC fragments that might reduce dependence on current infrastructure. Psychers across the galaxy reported dreams of a future where they served as choir networks rather than sacrificial fuel. Q himself stood alone in the dissolved courtroom, regarding his handiwork with satisfaction. "Well," he said to the empty space, "that was more interesting than I expected. The Emperor chose to continue suffering. Humanity chose to pursue evolution. Both decisions were made freely, which makes them infinitely more valuable than any outcome I could have imposed." He prepared to depart back to the Q continuum. Let's see if they actually follow through. I do enjoy being surprised. And with that, Q vanished, leaving the Warhammer 40,000 universe exactly as he'd found it. Brutal, grimdark, and now carrying the faintest spark of genuine hope that things might, impossibly, become less terrible. In the grim darkness of the far future, there was still only war. But now there was also the possibility of something more. The trial's echoes rippled across the Imperium in ways Q hadn't explicitly intended, but couldn't entirely prevent. Those who'd witnessed the proceedings, even with memories fading into dream logic, carried something changed within them. Inquisitors found themselves questioning orders before executing purges. Commissars hesitated before pulling triggers. Tech priests cautiously examined forbidden innovations. Billions of humans across 1,000,000 worlds felt a stirring they couldn't name, not rebellion, not heresy, but a question. Does it have to be this way? The Emperor, locked back in his eternal suffering, found the burden paradoxically lighter despite nothing physical changing. He'd chosen this, not from necessity alone, but from responsibility freely accepted. That distinction, microscopic in practical terms, meant everything in philosophical ones. He'd admitted his failures before a court of his own victims and chosen to continue anyway, not as infallible God, but as flawed being trying to do better. Guillimain moved forward with reforms that had seemed impossible before the trial. The Administratum's bureaucracy, while still glacial, showed unprecedented flexibility. The Mechanicus, guided by sudden visions of ancient technology, began projects that might reduce the Imperium's dependence on the Golden Throne. The process would take centuries at minimum, millennia more likely. But it had begun. Q's judgment had been characteristically double-edged, guilty but necessary, condemned but given opportunity, trapped but offered eventual freedom. The Imperium remained brutal, fascist, genocidal, all the things that made it monstrous. But now it carried within itself the seed of potential change, the possibility that 10,000 years of stagnation might give way to evolution. Whether that possibility would bear fruit or wither into another failed dream remained to be seen. The galaxy cared nothing for hope or justice. Chaos still hungered, Tyranids still approached, Orcs still fought, Necrons still awakened. The threats that justified the Imperium's existence had not diminished, but humanity, battered, broken humanity that had endured 10 millennia of darkness, now possessed something Q's trial had granted them: the understanding that their suffering, while perhaps necessary, was not inevitable forever, that the God Emperor himself admitted his failures and sought better paths, that even in a universe of eternal war, change remained possible. In the end, Q's verdict was neither acquittal nor execution, but something more nuanced. The Emperor was guilty, humanity was flawed, the Imperium was monstrous, and all of them deserved the chance to become something better. Not guaranteed redemption, but opportunity for it. In a galaxy that offered only war, that sliver of possibility was the greatest gift an omnipotent being could provide. The trial was over. The war continued. But now, impossibly, purpose accompanied the suffering. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. More stories await.